This is JM Today Media, bringing you the news coverage that you want to see.
Making you all wait a little bit more than 2 minutes. I have just one very brief thing off the top, and then I'm happy to dive right into your questions. So the Secretary will be wheels up a little later this afternoon, heading to Israel and other countries in the Middle East. In Israel, the Secretary will reaffirm the United States' ironclad commitment to Israel's security and emphasize advancing enduring peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Throughout the region, Secretary Blinken will discuss the importance of bringing the war in Gaza to an end, securing the release of all hostages, and alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian people. He will continue discussions with counterparts on post-conflict period planning and emphasize the need to chart a new path forward that enables Palestinians to rebuild their lives and realize their aspirations free from Hamas's tyranny. The Secretary will also underscore that additional food, medicine, and other urgently needed humanitarian aid must be delivered to civilians in Gaza. He will also discuss the need to reach a diplomatic resolution in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah that fully implements UN Security Council Resolution 1701 and allows civilians on both sides of the blue line to return to their homes. And lastly, he will reaffirm the U.S. commitment to work with partners across the region to de-escalate tensions and providing lasting stability. So with that, Matt, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Just on the trip, briefly, what other countries is he going to?
So Matt, I will let the travel team announce other stops as it relates to this schedule as the trip progresses. At this point, we can certainly share that he will be going to Israel, but additional stops are to be announced.
Okay, and then on this whole leaked document thing, on the intelligence assessment of Israel's preparations for a response, does that play any? Is that a problem for him on this current trip? Is that an issue of concern?
So I can't say that it has come up in any of the bilateral or diplomatic conversations that we've had. What I can say is that we have seen these reports as well. And as the president said earlier this morning, we're certainly concerned about them. But in terms of the specifics as it relates to this incident, I will let the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and DOJ speak to it. And I certainly don't expect it to have any bearing as it relates to the Secretary's not only his travels, but the objectives that the Secretary is bringing to this trip.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, with the Secretary on his way following last week's death of Yahya Sinwar, after the death, the administration came out very quickly saying, we see an opportunity to bring an end to this war. We want to get a ceasefire deal. But in the intervening time, the Israelis seem to have sort of doubled down on their approach. There's been a lot of death in northern Gaza. They're also bombing Beirut. Do you feel like that message that this is a time to take advantage of this moment to end the war has been heard from the Israeli side?
Well, Simon, that's exactly why he's going to the region, to have these very important conversations with partners in Israel and counterparts in other countries as well. Let's not forget where we were just a couple of months prior, in which the government of Israel had indicated that it had supported the bridging proposal that was in line with the contours of what President Biden had announced earlier in the spring when we were talking about what was needed to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. And Sinwar continued to be an obstacle. Obviously, we certainly are not going to speculate on the leadership of Hamas or what form that takes, and certainly the same decision that was in front of Mr. Sinwar, that same decision is in front of Hamas and whatever its leadership will be, in that whether they want to end the suffering of the Palestinian people, if they want to end the suffering that has been brought about them. So we expect the Secretary to talk about all of these issues. We feel strongly that there is an opportunity to move the ball forward as it relates violence to getting a ceasefire accomplished. I'm not going to speculate on any immediate end product or outcome, but we feel that it is important to engage not just with the Israelis but also other partners in the region to continue to have these important conversations for all the reasons that you mentioned. There continues to be a need to address the humanitarian situation. We obviously want to ultimately see the violence to stop as well. So these are all things that we'll continue to discuss.
And at this point, so we understand where we are, there isn't anyone who's emerged in Hamas who you are now negotiating with through the intermediary?
Not to my knowledge. Of course, I will let our mediators speak for themselves and let them speak to what kind of engagements they may or may not have with Hamas. But Matt spoke a little bit about this on Thursday. In the aftermath of Hania's death, you saw there was some sort of semi-public process in which Hamas had indicated who its new leadership was. I have no reason to think that a similar process would not take place in the ensuring time ahead.
And you mentioned the humanitarian situation. Seems like things have only got worse in northern Gaza. You had this 30-day ultimatum that you've given to the Israelis. I wonder if you could give us an update on have they made any progress towards what was laid out in the letter?
So as we talked about last week, we have seen some progress on some of these things. As we saw last week the reopening of the route from Jordan. We also saw the Erez crossing in the north reopen. Talking about some of the efforts that we saw last week. Look, certainly nobody in the U.S. government is going to stand in front of you and say that we are satisfied or find the humanitarian situation in any part of Gaza satisfactory. And these are one of the things that we expect the Secretary to raise directly and discuss, not just with partners in Israel, but other counterpart countries on what more can be done to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. A number of border crossings, to answer your question specifically, Simon, are open. We are seeing truckloads enter the Gaza Strip, and we'll continue to press for more. Absolutely more is needed. More food, more water, more humanitarian aid overall.
Just on the situation in northern Gaza, it doesn't seem like the humanitarian situation has improved dramatically, and there's been an increase of bombings, lots of deaths reported, lots of airstrikes. I wonder if the people of Gaza, especially those in northern Gaza, based on your rhetoric after the death of Sinwar, might have thought that this spelled positive news, but then the weekend probably hasn't left them with that feeling. So, what would you say to those people who are saying, well, why aren't we getting humanitarian aid in? Why are we still being hit with these airstrikes?
Well, a couple of things. Simon. First, as it relates to the letter that Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin sent to Israeli counterparts, it had a 30-day stipulation, and there are a number of factors in that letter, of course, in which that we have not seen the totality of progress achieved. That being said, we have seen some positive steps in the right direction from last week, and we have seen some of that continue. Broadly speaking, of course, more needs to be done. But the broader point here, Simon, is that entities in the region are faced with a choice now. Whatever the leadership of Hamas looks like, and Hamas as a whole, they have a choice on whether they want to engage meaningfully in continuing the conversations that had taken place earlier in the year when we were talking about achieving a ceasefire in Gaza. We think that continues to be the best path forward in which will alleviate the humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people, but also allow the remaining hostages, of which there continue to remain 7 American citizens, are able to return home. And that continues to be an enduring priority for us. And I know it is for others in the region as well. Leon.
Yeah, I understand the Secretary feels important to continue to engage in the region, as you were saying. What do you think his leverage or the U.S. in general, his leverage, is 2 weeks ahead of the elections, going back to the region. Are his hands tied? Is he going to be listened to? Can anything happen?
Leon, I kind of respectfully disagree with the premise of the question, and I'm going to evoke what many of you have heard Secretary Blinken say pretty regularly, is that, in this department and in his role as Secretary of State, and I would say that extends to all of us that work for him, we don't do or engage in politics. We are engaged in policy, and what I can say unequivocally is that pursuing a ceasefire as it relates to Gaza, pursuing a ceasefire in Gaza is in the interest of course, the Palestinian people, because it will allow an additional influx of humanitarian aid, create the conditions, hopefully, for further conversations to happen so that we can see a independent Palestinian state and a Gaza Strip that is no longer a springboard for terrorism on the Israeli people, and a Gaza Strip that is hopefully unified with the West Bank as an independent state. It is in the interest of the Israeli people, because, again, for far too many years, they have been living under the threat of terrorism and proxy groups and malign actors in the region. It is, of course, in the interest of the United States, and it's in the interest of American citizens. First, the Middle East region is a region in which there are a number of American citizens who live there and call it home. But beyond that, the United States, the American people, it is in their interest to see a region pull itself out of these endless cycles of violence that we have seen for far too many years that date back further than October 7th. So it's not about leverage, Leon. It is what do we want to see that is the best thing that can happen for the region, that is in the interest of the American people. And pursuing a ceasefire in Gaza, continuing to have conversations with counterparts of what a post-conflict period can look like, all of these things are in the United States' interest, and all of these things are in the interest of the American people. And that is true irregardless of whatever may come when it comes to our elections.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, but just to move on very quickly, Lebanon, do you condone strikes against the financial institutions that struck the affiliates to Hezbollah? And there's now considerable damage in southern Beirut.
So
is it going to become another Gaza?
Look, Leon, we've been pretty clear and consistent about the fact that we do not want to see regular and daily strikes into Beirut. As it relates to these specific financial institutions that you're asking about, Leon, I've seen those reports, and I'd let the IDF speak to its current operations. I, from up here, could not offer any analysis on what kind of role they may or may not have had as it relates to Hezbollah's broader infrastructure, whether it be financial or otherwise. I'm not saying that they did or didn't. I'm just saying I can't offer that assessment from up here. Broadly, though, our call continues to be the same, that Israel needs to do everything it can to not target civilian infrastructure and abide by international humanitarian law. And in all of its operations, needs to take every possible measure to minimize impacts on civilians and civilian infrastructure. This is something that Secretary Blinken has raised consistently with engagements that he's had with counterparts, but it's also something that President Biden raised with the Prime Minister earlier in the year as well. Nick, go ahead.
There's new reporting that the State Department is investigating an IDF unit for alleged sexual assault of Palestinian detainees. Is that true? And if so, what additional detail can you provide on that? And then separately, just wanted to ask if the State Department is still facilitating flights out of Lebanon.
So on your first question, Nick, I just